This week on Linux Weekly Daily Wednesdays, Spreed brings video conferencing to the Nextcloud. Because reasons, ? But OpenShot 2.2 is out, and it includes a 4K profile of goodness.
Adobe releases Flash Player version 24 for Linux. Yeah, you heard me. It just doesn't die. And someone better pick up that phone because I called it. The Nintendo Switch will support Vulcan.
With what I hope to be a trend-setting move, Ubuntu drops the antiquated swap partition. And do you feel your terminal is too sad and dull?
Nope.
Well, I'll tell you all you need to know to make it flashy and helpful.
I can't wait for that. But let's just get right in to the final Flashdown.
Indeed. Yep. It's Flash version 24. It's been released for Linux. With some caveats, as the case may be, you don't get any 3D acceleration, GPU-based anyway, it's all software. And you also don't get support for DRM and, digital rights managed media. So we're getting a GIMP version because it's Adobe, and they have, like the title of the article says from GHacks, they've been ignoring Linux for the past couple of years, and then last month, or the month before that, they said, oh, yeah, no, we're going to be updating the Linux version of Flash. Why? Strider?
Yeah, I mean, I know that Flash needs to die, and it is dying slowly, but it is disappearing. But it's missing one of the few features you would want Flash to have, that is the 3D acceleration for, like, for example, games and video playback with DRM. Those things are missing, so I can't really say they are supporting Flash on Linux. I have no idea if this is supported in Chrome, but yeah, I mean, nice try, Adobe.
Yeah, no, it's Flash. Not only is it one of the very few viable attack vectors to Linux remotely, it's completely pointless nowadays. There are better alternatives for everything now.
Let
it die.
Definitely looking at this and thinking about it. Well, I could say it's almost 2017. And really, like, the only version parity with Flash that you should currently have on your Linux desktop is uninstalled. That's really the only match for match that I think you're looking for. Well, I'm actually a bit hard-pressed to think of anything that requires Flash these days. What were you saying, Strider?
If you have Chrome installed, then you have Flash.
Well, you might have Flash, and Narlin brings up a good point, man. Zombocom, HTML5 compliant, so what more could you possibly need? But let's move on to Nextcloud. And by that, I mean Spreed, because what we desperately needed is another, WebRTC video and audio conferencing solution. But this is for Nextcloud, and it is absolutely a thing. When you really, really need video conferencing built into your homebrew cloud solution, they got your back, man. This one does integrate with Nextcloud apps, kind of, sort of, but right now it only supports contacts and users. They do say, hey, man, we're not reinventing the wheel. It is based on simple WebRTC, has screen sharing, chat integration. Okay, that's a thing. Strider, I kind of wonder what would happen, because it seems like everyone is releasing some type of RTC client, if the 8 or 9 different companies all got together and just made one good one.
Except that software development doesn't work that way. You have to keep, like, development.
How many Linux distros exist again?
There are thousands of distros, and you can't just put everyone together, like, in a big bag and tell them to make a great product. It doesn't work that way. So you have to keep the teams small. At this point, I don't know if there should be, like, less teams or like bigger teams more involved in the development of a product. But one thing is true, is that you can't just take everyone and put them together into building one product. But yeah, I mean, it seems that nowadays everyone is making their own WebRTC clients. I even thought about making one at one point, so it's not excluded in the future that I will make one. But yeah, I mean, this is the true power of decentralization. Use a different service than everyone else, so no one bothers you. I mean,
well, it's also a polite way of saying make sure that you can't call anyone.
Yeah,
exactly.
Make sure you have absolutely no access to anyone ever. And I remember we actually tried Spreed. This was the client that had the involved system that you had to unplug your webcam, start the call, and you had to start the conference call in a very specific order. Otherwise, some people wouldn't be able to hear one another. Then you could plug the camera back in. It was a mess. I don't see a fix to any of that.
I don't know. It's still a neat project, and I mean, if you've already set up your homebrew Nextcloud solution, you can, click this in place, and it's a good idea. But okay. I mean, it's just definitely a thing.
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, pick up that phone. It's been ringing off the hook as I've been calling it. Then again, maybe calling your graphics API NVN wasn't such a good idea. Am I right, Nintendo? People are just going to start making assumptions. Indeed. So the Kronos Group's certification page now lists the Nintendo Switch, trademark, as a conformant product for Vulcan 1.0. Yep. The tablet console hybrid thingy that Nintendo is going to be releasing is going to support Vulcan, and that's good. Strider?
Yeah, I mean, I think Nintendo was part of the Kronos group for a while now. If you look at the partners on their partners page, there was Nintendo. It's been here for quite a while. But yeah, this will lead to more Vulcan developers, so that's a good thing. Potentially, like more Linux games. I wouldn't expect any of the Nintendo Switch games to come on Linux. That would be kind of ridiculous. I mean,
yeah, no, it's just Nintendo we're talking about. They're the kind of people who will let you make a video of their content on YouTube if you give them 90% of the revenue, basically.
No, they don't let you. They just throw ads against it and claim it as their own because Nintendo cares. Interesting piece of kit. I know Flibbit was looking at this, and he was like, oh, yeah, all right. So we basically got a Shield tablet that's not running Android. It'll be interesting to see what comes from that. But speaking of Shield tablets.
Indeed. So we've mentioned the Shields, all of them. That's at one point or another, and there have been some leaks regarding the upcoming Shield.
I just gotta say, man, that controller looks diseased.
Yeah, I know. Just for comparison, for those people watching the video version, I have the original Shield controller right here. It's a bit bulky, sure, but it's recognizable as a controller. Now,
one thing they did say that they were going to update the Bluetooth integration, and they said that controller has horrible battery life. Is that true?
This one, not so much, and it's actually Wi-Fi Direct. These are Wi-Fi Direct controllers. So if they're using Bluetooth with the new one, so that's a major difference, I guess. Now, the specs haven't exactly leaked. There are a couple of, basically the only thing that leaked were just the pictures. And
I think you might want to throw some air quotes around those pictures because they're more like poorly done 3D renders.
Yes, they are. And let's face it, that controller doesn't look very good. And both the remote and the device itself, the Android TV console thingy, looks very similar to the old one. Now, they did say that it will probably have more up-to-date hardware on the inside. It's like a little bit of educated guessing says that it's probably the Tegra X2. That's the Pascal one, because there's an X in Pascal, isn't that right, NVIDIA?
No, but they're probably just going to call this one the Shield. So just to add to the naming confusion. Now, Strider, this is what puzzles me most about this. I'm shocked that they've shipped enough the original Shield, not the Shield or the Shield, but this Shield to give it a refresh.
Yeah, I mean, if it does indeed come with the Tegra X2, that would make it more powerful than the Switch, the Nintendo Switch, because the details of the Switch have kind of leaked, I think, as well. Yes, and they're using the previous Tegra, so not the Pascal one, the one before
it's
that.
It's the X1, yeah.
Yeah, and that would make this Shield console a bit more powerful than the.
And it kind of makes sense when you think about it. If we go back to when Nvidia first released this console, you can actually see them going to Nintendo and say, like, look, Microsoft, Sony, they have AMD making their consoles. We'll make yours. And Nintendo's going, okay, fine, show us what you can do. So they released the first Shield console with the Tegra X1 and proved, okay, so that's basically the single most powerful Android device to ever exist. And then Nintendo said, okay, then you can build our console. And that's how the Switch was born. Now I wonder, how long will it take for the Switch games to unofficially make their way into one of these?
I don't know. That would definitely be the only way to see that getting over to Shields, because Nintendo is not going to let them dog food like that. Yeah. Something lower price with better performance. I mean, that is definitely going to be the thing. But I heard the Ubuntu is killing the swap file.
Oh, yeah. So, you may know me as the guy who hates partitions. And yeah, I'm pleased to announce that Ubuntu decided to go without the swap partitions and go with swap files instead. So, I consider this a good thing, because the swap partitions, they're annoying. They can take up space on your disk, and you can't easily get rid of them. And I used to have no swap at all. And then I wanted to install VMware last week, and it complained about me not having swap. So it took me 2 minutes to create a swap file. This is the kind of flexibility that using swap file gives you. I mean, if you want some, you can have swap files. If you don't want any, you can get rid of it. It's very cool.
Yeah, getting rid of it. I remember, what was it? It was introduced, I think, in Windows XP or ME, one of those, that introduced page files. Yes, remember those? Those were always the first thing I nuked when space was at a premium. And space is still a premium in the age of, I don't know, SSDs with teeny tiny sizes. This one's brick, but whatever. For teeny tiny sizes, they're fast, admittedly, but they're small. So you kind of need that space. So you just...
Yeah, and the thing is, with swap files, you can get that space back. With a swap partition, much harder.
But here's the thing. How about an alternative to swap entirely? I mean, everyone's...
having 16 gigabytes of memory, that's a good idea.
Yeah, that'll do it.
I don't know. I mean, I like this idea. I support this idea. Strider makes a good case for that. I mean, if you know... But then you got to think, when are you going to know that you need the swap? Sometimes you're not. To take a little comment out, for a common general machine, most of the time, a swap file will not be used. And that sounds all fantastic and fun until you play a game with horrible memory leaks and it hard opes your box. Then you go, Then you hear me cackling all the way back from Athens because you're in Canada, because I had a swap file and I saw it coming. No, cool. I'm definitely looking for something different than a swap partition, just because, I mean, memory's cheap, but not everyone has enough, wet stinky cash to buy 32 gigabytes. I only keep 8 gigs on this box because there's the elusive other 8 gig module somewhere in this house, and I'm not going to buy another one. So good on them. Pedro, do we have anyone to thank this week for making this show possible?
Well, according to the show notes, we have to thank Ertain. I don't know how to spell that, but, well, I know how to spell it. I just don't know how to pronounce it. But hey, if you'd like to fuel this insanity that we do every week, and this very show is brought to you by you, the people giving us some wet, stinky cashes over on patreon.com/Linux Gamecast. It's easy enough. You can sign in for just 5 cents a show, and you will get early, I hesitate to use the term early access because now that has a very negative connotation, but you can actually get earlier access to our, say, Left 4 Brads. Or if we make it to those 200 wet stinkies per week, we can actually force Jordan to play a game that he doesn't enjoy very much.
Speaking of that, we knocked out a Brad last week. I do want to mention something. I just kind of missed a comment, I think, on last week's Linux Weekly Daily Wednesday. Matt Clark, he had a little thing. He says, for the record, he uses a MacBook Pro because I am the lead developer at Mobile App Shop. Okay, we're going to get into that probably next week. Thanks for taking the time to send us that comment. But, Strider, what is this unholy creation that you've put in the show notes?
Yeah, so this comes from Fabrice Bellard, which you may know because he's the creator of FFmpeg and QEMU, and he did a bunch of other things as well, like this Linux VM running in JavaScript in your browser, and other crazy stuff. I mean, he's always, he shows up once in a while with a crazy project, and this is another one of those. So this one is a RISC-V emulator capable of addressing 128 bits of like integer and floating points. So it's basically a 128 bits OS. Built on the RISC architecture. You can boot that on Fedora if you want. There's also a web version if you're crazy enough to run that. You can run it in your browser. I mean, yeah, this is pretty crazy stuff because I hadn't heard about 128 bits OSs until now.
What category does this fall under? Does this fall under useful or insane but extremely neat?
It falls under Monster
Insane.
Cameron probably claiming I am talking out of my bumhole again this week because it's the RISC-V architecture. It's you remember Power 8? That motherboard that someone was developing to run the IBM processors. Yeah, that's based on RISC-V, sort of.
Yeah, this is still a very cool project. I don't know if there are any applications for it, especially since it's emulating something the hardware can't do. I mean, all our CPUs and stuff are 64 bits, so I have no idea what's already
nonetheless, you can check
uses.
that out at bellard.org. You will be able to find all this in our show notes. But Strider, you like your bling, so all right.
Yeah, I like my bling. I like my terminals flashy, and
That hurts.
not for a reason. I find it useful for me.
Power line.
I used to use Powerline Shell, which is a Python script that will customize your prompts. This is using Z Shell, by the way. I found this new project called Power Level 9K. It was on Ike Doherty's Google Plus. Like, it was totally unrelated. It was something related to Mate. And yeah, somebody was asking, what's there on your terminal? And he posted a link on Power Level 9K. And okay, this is neat. I need to switch to that. It's pure Z Shell, no Python here, no dependencies. It will require you to use some custom fonts if you want to have those nice icons. Like you can have the penguin ink icon in your terminal.
That one's mine. That one's pure bash.
That's yours. If you want, you can have GitHub icons. You can have and basically you can have everything. You can have Git integration. You can have the time. You can have the return code of the command you just launched. You can have the VN for Python. You can have the RBN for Ruby. All that kinds of neat stuff. What you will have to do is clone the Power Level 9K repo. You read the docs; they're pretty clear on that. And then you have to install some fonts to get those nice icons.
Or if you just like your bash and you want to make it look pretty, maybe not with as much functionality, you can have mine. I'll be sure to post a link in the show notes before we wrap it up, so Ven can have it in the final show notes. But
good. I thought you were about to say so Ven could use it in his terminal. I was just like, shaking my head.
Yeah, no, I know better than that. But yeah, in my case, you have a 2-line shell, and it gives you, say, if you have a process running in the background, if you trail it with 1 single ampersand, it will be running in the background. It will give you a count of how many processes you have running in the background. And if one of them stopped, it'll show up as a Z because, Control Z is stop. If you have an error in the previous output of the past command, you get a set face. It's kind of nice. And it also has, it's not, again, as flashy as the power line or power level 9K as the case may be, but it looks good enough, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I find this useful because especially the Git integration, it tells you if you have files change, if you, what branch you're in, all that kind of stuff. This is the most useful thing. It's really the Git thing. And yeah, I mean, it looks nice. Yeah, I like it a lot. Same thing, I have my dot files on GitHub, so I'll post a link to this in the show notes as well.
All right. We're almost out of here, but we do have to mention that OpenShot 2.2 has been released. Then it just says 4K video editing exclamation mark. It doesn't say it. Really doesn't. Really what it does mean to say is it currently has 4K profile support and also has 2.5K. And they have fixed the broken Ubuntu 16.10 PPAs, but you don't really need to worry about that because this does ship as an app image, so it's wicked simple to install and go, wow, this is still kind of busted, and not have to worry about removing it from your system. They did move the project to GitHub because, like Dragons, S3 is the expensive. Trust me, I know this on a personal matter. On top of that, I'm going to give this a Pepsi challenge. I might do it this evening. I don't know if I'm going to try it with this show because I want to get it out tonight. But maybe another thing, we're recording a little bit of special sauce. We will give it a spin and see if it works. One of the biggest things they did talk about was the performance, and they've improved the caching along with some keyframe stuff. We will see. They've currently set up a Patreon as well, so if you want to support this project, even though it was successfully kickstarted, you can do that.
Yeah, I was about to ask, didn't they have a Kickstarter for version 2.0?
Strider, you excited? I know you love video editing as much as I do.
I don't do a lot of video editing, but when I do some video editing, I use KDE Live.
Yeah, I would use KDE Live too, but I don't want to install all things KDE for video editor. So.
Yeah, it kind of needs the kitchen sink or the framework, if you prefer.
I don't mind. I don't mind at all. I use GNOME and I install all the KDE things.
Okay, and that's why you don't have enough space to have a proper swap file, buddy.
I have all the space of any swap I want.
Before we get out of here, one final note. Anything that moves, yet again, it's not a toaster, it's not a dead badger, but you can install Ubuntu on a, let's go with the word Onda?
Onda, yeah.
It's basically one of the bazillion, I even have one, mine's called a WinBook. It's the Windows 10 wicked cheap tablets, the quad-core Intel, gig 2 of RAM, because they're subsidized by Windows and by Intel just to try to get some type of market share. But who's the lovely, beautiful party person who put this together? Thomas C. Kind of goes through everything he did to get up and running. It's not terribly complex. I expected quite a bit of pain, but no, he pretty much got it straight through. But ultimately, at the end of the day, once you complete this, you do have to ask yourself, well, what do I do with it now?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of trouble considering that no Linux desktop is optimized for touchscreens, so...
GNOME 3 would like a word with you.
No, it's very... I mean, both...
no, even the lock screen has you dragging it up to unlock it. Yeah, that's meant for a mouse and keyboard,
a small detail, but have you used touchscreens with Linux? I have. I mean, I had a laptop with a touchscreen. It's not that touchscreen friendly. And for some reason, people want to believe that GNOME Shell and Unity are made for tablets.
Because
those
they
people
are. At the
crazy.
moment you open up the HUD, it fills the entire screen with big icons for you to
Yeah,
put your
that's
big
not enough
stinky
to make it
fingers.
Listen,
Absolutely.
Strider, the main reason people want to believe that Unity is good on touch is because they would desperately like to believe it's good for something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. It's good for your general usage, but it's very keyboard driven.
We'll have to disagree on that one.
I've looked at the setup when they were originally doing, because this applies to a lot of these just general, 8.5, 9-inch Windows tablets for mine, and they have added Wi-Fi support. That was the one thing I was waiting on before I took the Pepsi challenge on that business. I might try it, but no.
You will have to wrestle with the whole 32-bit UEFI and a 64-bit SoC issue that every single one of these tablets has, because OEMs, they're smart people. Let's put a 32-bit UEFI just for the sake of some Windows compliance in a system that is completely 64-bit, because that makes sense.
I don't know. Maybe, I really don't think there is a seriously touch-driven interface for anything Linux. And then again, as Dr. Girlfriend looked at me trying to use this, 8-inch tablet with Windows 10 to do something with thin hands typing, she's like, that is the most adorable thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, but on that tablet, there is also Android on it. And for some reason, they ship with Android 4.4 and KitKats.
Yeah, remember the whole premium space thing? Yeah, I'm guessing that was a cost-saving decision.
I don't know. How about we have a little slice of pie?
Yeah, sounds about good.
Right.
And you remember the Pixel desktop environment we mentioned for the Raspberry Pi a while back. There was even a little bit of controversy that most of the pictures it originally came with didn't exactly have a free license. But I think they've actually gotten rid of
And
those
of course,
pictures.
you put it on a ThinkPad. Naturally.
Yeah. They
And it's quite old.
what did they say? The finest laptop ever made finer? Yeah, that's stroking your own thingy a little too much. But yeah, it's the Pixel. It's available for x86 Debian currently. I'm sure if anyone is really interested in it, let's face it, it's basically LXD with a couple of more features and a prettier looking theme out of the box. And if you must have it, if you have a system that has those minimal requirements, probably a good idea.
Strider, you're going to put it on all the notebooks.
Minimal requirements, that's not a lot. I mean, you only need 512 megabytes of RAM to run it, so pretty much any old computer you'll be able to run it. The only thing it doesn't have compared to the Raspberry Pi Edition is it doesn't have Minecraft and it doesn't have Mathematica. So they have a special license to ship those on the Pi, but they don't have this to ship it on the regular x86 image.
Well, then you can just buy the regular Minecraft version and run it with Java.
Yeah, but then you need a much more powerful machine.
Yeah, you do.
Neat project, by the way. You can use it. Give it a spin. If you like it, you could tell us about it.
Wait. Hold on a second. Don't we have a very special guest that will be joining us for not an interview per se, but more of a prolonged discussion regarding a certain AMD processor that came out or was announced recently?
No. That sounds like a horrible idea because Santa Claus turned us down. However, all the way from Josh Tech, Mr. Walrath, or Walrus, as Jordan's going to call you because you called him Jordan Quang one time, and I don't think he's ever gotten it. It sounds horrifying.
That's okay.
But you might know him from another gig that he also does, PC Perspective. Josh is genuinely a bigger AMD dork than I am, and that's saying a lot because I owned a K5. Did you ever get a K5?
I never did. My first AMD product, I was kind of a late bloomer. It was the K6, but in college I helped a friend of mine get a new computer, and he got the AMD 48640.
48640.
So,
all right, that's.
He was running at the 40 megahertz, and he had the higher bus speed, and it's very similar to the DX266 from Intel.
Very similar. You remember the what was it? Cyrix, where they were like 97% Intel compatible.
Back in that time, it was kind of bad, and then their 686s that IBM also grabbed. I mean, they had a few small issues as well, but water under the bridge.
Not what we're here for. We're here to talk about the new sauce. Yes, the amazing thing, and this is not hopefully going to be Bulldozer 2 Electric Boogaloo. Nay, we're talking about Ryzen and AMD. They did their live launch, and they're like, okay, here's the thing. We were all watching. It's like, okay, this looks neat. They're going to compare it to an i7. We all did the Blender file. You'll see that in our Shadow Realm static. But then the stream ended, and there was no pricing information. So,
no, and I guess that's as good a place to start as any, really. So here's the thing. Dr. Lisa Su, not too long ago, she said that AMD is not competing on price anymore. How are they competing?
Well, that's a really good question. We don't know jack all about Ryzen other than what they've shown us. We know some of the basics. Hot Chips came out. They talked about the architecture. We know a lot of things about the low-level stuff. We know it's made on essentially a copy of Samsung's 14 nanometer, kind of higher powered process. It's not their low power. I can't remember the exact connotation that they give them. It's like LPP plus or all these damn names and letters. It's worse than gigabytes in their motherboard names. Don't try to
remember those names.
Yeah. But we do know it's going to be a decent sized chip. In between 250 and probably 380 millimeter square, which is a pretty good chunk of a die size. We got to look back at where AMD was. If you remember what was their high end?
The 9590.
No. I'm talking about earlier.
About the motherboard smelter, even.
No, the Socket 940, the original Socket 940. That was the first dual channel. It was the something 52.
I know which one you're talking about, but I can't remember the exact.
Anyway, that came out, and that was over $1,000. But it also provided performance and features that Intel didn't have with the Pentium 4. Down further along the line, they had the Athlon 64 3200 plus, which came in around $350, $400 when it was first introduced, and you had to have, of course, the new Socket 754 motherboard. They had lower versions, and then they eventually went to the Socket 939 and had the X2s, and again the dual core versions of those then were $1,000, $1,100. But again, Intel didn't have anything even close in terms of power consumption, IPC, and actual throughput, because they put so many things on the die with the Athlon 64 that Intel didn't have, namely the memory controller and the hyper transport. These were all really good next generation things that AMD did that Intel didn't have. Well, Ryzen is different because there were only so many things that AMD could do to bring more things onto the chip to make things faster that Intel hadn't done. Well, Intel has done all those things. They've got really fast PCIe 3.0. They've got fast memory controllers. They have limited I/O on some of the stuff, and they've got like QPI, but the DMI connection to their South bridges, which are again fully stocked with features that an AMD does not still have with even their FM2, the latest FM2 Plus chipsets. So AMD is now just catching up, and they're not going past what Intel has. And if you look at the results that we've seen, that it's a processor that is comparable from these limited benchmarks to what the i7 6900, which is again an $1,100, $1,200 processor. So until we get some real benchmarks, it's going to be a lot of speculation. But because this is not a leap forward and they're still trying to gain some market share, anything they can do to improve their margins and get back some market share where they're sitting at 20, 25%, like they were in the Athlon 64 days. They can't price themselves out of that without, and it's an interesting balance in that you charge too much, you're not going to ship anything out. You charge too little and your bottom line is going to be hurting. So, it's, sorry about that. It's a balance. And until we know what they're going to choose now, I think, was it the 9570, the one that initially, the 5 gigahertz pile driver based unit, it was, initially priced at $1,000. And how many of those do you think that AMD sold?
I'm guessing no.
Man, I mean, when I'm thinking about it, they probably definitely sold both of them. The way
it's really funny because I've got 2 of those processors sitting somewhere behind me, and I mean, once they got the price down to like $300, then people were probably more willing to buy them. But the sad thing about that is you had to have liquid cooling, either prepackaged or your own, to be able to handle the 220 watt TDP
water blocks in them. But
yeah. And you couldn't just run them with any motherboard.
$1,000 Intel CPUs. And that's why a lot of people went to AMD in the first place, because, I mean, it was somewhat comparative in its own way back when, it was just like $900 for an Intel CPU. But, I could pick up a K5 or a K6 at the time for about 400 quid. And we've kind of gotten back to those days again, man.
Yeah, and especially with the E series like Haswell E and Broadwell E. Haswell E, they released 5950 at about close to $1,000 MSRP. And with the 6900K, they crossed the 1100s. And with the 6950, 6960, I can remember. The X version is $1,700. That's really far too much. That's literally how much this computer that's sitting next to me and these 2 monitors, plus this keyboard, plus this mouse, and even my Shield tablet. That's how much all of those put together cost.
Now, Strider, answer me this. Why do you hate AMD?
I don't really hate them, but I find them less appealing. They have been since, I don't know, maybe 2009, when I went back to Intel, because I had AMD CPUs. So I had the first Thunderbird, the first 1 gigahertz CPU they released. Then I switched to the Athlon XP one. That was, I think, the last one I bought full price. And then I got the Athlon 64 3200, I think, which I got. I didn't pay full price for it, but because I was working at a computer shop. But yeah, that was some good stuff. And then, well, I wanted to change my machine, and it made no sense to go through AMD. Then I switched to Linux and Linux gaming and all that thing. And I mean, it wasn't just as good as Intel CPUs. So that's why I never went back to AMD. And maybe if they are competitive in the performance, that's what is really lacking right now is if you're on an AMD machine, you're not going to get the same performance on games on Linux as well.
There's something I definitely want to ask Josh. If we take the hype train all the way over to Speculationsville, do you think we'll see a repeat of when was it, around 98, 99, 2000, when we saw the initial Thunderbird kick in at, a full gigahertz? And I kind of believe that caught Intel off guard just a bit. Yeah,
the original K7, which came out in 450, 500, and 550 megahertz, was a huge shock to Intel. I mean, everybody kind of knew it was coming, and even the socket looked identical to Intel's and was just turned around, and it had the half-speed backside cache on it, and of course, Intel, then people were kind of poo-pooing it. And so the K7 came out, and it was competing against the original Pentium 3, it was the Pentium 2, essentially MMX. It kind of wiped the floor with it. I mean, it was a 550 megahertz K7 ran as fast, if not a little faster, than a 600 megahertz Pentium 3. And that did propel them up further. And they had the Iron Gate chipset that had, some pretty good features to it and very comparable to what Intel had. So, that might be a good comparison to where we're at, because they're not offering anything more, but they're offering more for a smaller price.
More for a smaller price. I'm definitely thinking about that. But then we get, are they going to compete on price? If you, like I said, we're over in speculations. Well, the 8-core part, 16-threaded part, do you think they're just going to kneecap Intel with like $500?
It wouldn't shock me if it initially came out at $599, just because I like to say $599 really excitedly.
Do it.
And $599.
There it is.
I think that would be a price point. A lot of people have speculated it was like $500, but I think that if they can get it at a pretty solid 3.4 gigahertz with a 3.6 to 3.7 gigahertz boost, and kind of keep thermals and power draw under control, they could probably charge $599, and a lot of people will pick it up. I mean, they've got apparently 4 SKUs that they're talking about. They've got the high end, and then they've got the 8-core 16-thread that is not going to be as spiffy in terms of overclocking. It won't have as much boost. And they got the 6-core and then the 4-core, and those prices are going to be apparently in between $150 and this $500 to $600 range. But I think AMD is going to test the waters, and they may initially bring it out at $900.
Are we going to see that repeat of, you remember, performance per cycle, when they had to explain the XP number versus the actual clock speed? You remember that?
Mm-hmm. I don't think that's going to be an issue, because everything now they've got a part number. Mm-hmm. I mean, you talk about the i7 6770K. How many people know the base clock and the boost clock of that? All they know is that it's got a model number and it's got a price attached to it. And I think that, megahertz used to be king, but when you're talking about, to the average consumer, is like, oh yeah, this is going to go from 4 gigahertz to a 4.2 gigahertz boost. And he's like, what the hell does that mean? It's like, well, in certain things, it's going to go faster.
I think
that
means a lot to the type of person who puts neon lights in their case.
Now say that again.
Yeah.
No, I said I think that might mean a lot to the type of person who puts neon lights in their case.
It could be. Just remember, kids, cold cathode tubes tend to blow up and start fires in your
LEDs.
Case, so.
Just use LEDs.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
But the Strider brought up the issue of the performance, and the thing that compounds the problem with AMD processors on Linux, and I've experienced that firsthand. Sven has too. He has an FX 8150. I have an 8370E. And I overclocked mine to 4.2 gigahertz because the V core at the stock voltage allowed me to do that, and it's stable, so I kept it. But the biggest thing, and Strider's PC is very similar to mine, with the difference that mine has the AMD FX and Strider's has the 4790K. And the biggest thing here is that the IPC performance in games, especially in OpenGL, because in OpenGL there is one thread that's taking care of sending out all of the graphics calls to the GPU. So you're getting bottlenecked with 90% of the games. And during the presentation, Dr. Lisa Su said they had a 40% increase in IPC. And that's good. comparatively speaking, that's pretty good. And they did show the Blender and the Handbrake benchmarks, but they didn't actually show any game benchmarks.
They did show a little bit of Dota 2, but it was
yes, they showed Dota 2 and streaming at the same time, but that doesn't qualify.
Okay, here's something I actually want to ask you. I know Josh watched the live stream because they were showing, a lad that was streaming Dota 2 and playing at the same time. Now I can use that with Vulcan with my 980 with an 8150, and I don't drop frames at 1080.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought that was a very curious demonstration they did.
Well, it was the demonstration was not so much the game, but yeah, it was him and this kind of heavy duty streaming he was doing in the background. And so the game itself, when you looked at his monitor, it was smooth, it was working fine. But with a 4-core 8-thread, for some reason on that back half of streaming out, it was choking, and I don't know why. I was kind of curious about that, because how many streamers do you know that are playing games and streaming on the same machine have those kind of issues?
That was definitely one of my points. I was looking at it and kind of pointing out my 8150 is what we are using right now to stream out, and we do the games and all that fun stuff on that. Never had that problem, especially with Vulcan, because Vulcan's like, oh, look, Bulldozer, look, 8, well, not really 8 cores, but kind of 8 cores, and I'm going to use all of them.
Yeah, and that's the thing about Vulcan, at least the way that AMD's been trying to sell it, is that they focused on the whole multi-threading thing, parallel compute, if you will. Mm-hmm. And Intel focused really on the single-threaded performance, and now everything is a single-threaded instruction that gets sent to a core. So it's all single-threaded all the time. And both DirectX 12 and Vulcan, which is what matters because Linux, they both tend to make use of all of the extra available threads. And it's kind of pains me to see that there are so many people still not using Vulcan.
No, man. No, I mean, we've already talked about it. I mean, just because Nintendo's using Vulcan, that means we'll get all the games. No, it doesn't.
No, it does not.
We're going to have to smack some developers around because the X12 is not necessarily portable, moving system to system. I mean, it's not necessarily Java by any means. While Vulcan English Vin is quite a bit more portable than that. Josh, the X12 is the future, bro, right?
Sure. It's it's not the panacea that a lot of people have obviously been kind of talking about or thinking about or hoping about, because DX12 it does a lot of the same things that kind of Vulcan does, but in Microsoft's way. Mm-hmm. But what I see kind of DX12 doing more than anything else is putting a lot of the burden of rendering and the game pipeline and all that into the original coder's hands. And so instead of making DX 11 to try to run, be a catch-all of everything, and poorly coded stuff's going to run, and it's going to run crappy on it, but it's going to run. But Microsoft still has to do a lot of work in the background to make sure everything works. They've kind of pushed all that off into the developers. Mm-hmm. And there's some good and bad about that. I mean, if you just kind of take the base. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I mean, it's like going back, I drew my first triangle using Glide. So, I mean, you're definitely writing a lot closer to the metal, and there's a lot of more room for mistake, but we're seeing, I don't want to say dumbed down versions, but we're seeing rendering pipelines put into Unity game engine. We've seen it in Unreal Engine 4, and I've just seeing the adoption versus what I've seen with DX12.
Yeah, well, it is a bigger platform.
Yeah, what we need now.
A bigger.
You're the developer, so go ahead.
Yeah, what we need now are good engines that support Vulcan, because either Vulcan or DX12, they're much closer to the metal, and yeah, it's much harder to code right. So as soon as we get widely used engines such as Unreal Engine, for example, soon that this uses Vulcan, then we will get some good games out of them.
Yeah, but we're seeing more DirectX 12 games built in Unreal Engine 4 than we are seeing Vulcan. And there's also the fact that as good as Epic have been towards Linux and actually allowing people to see the source code and contribute some modifications and even some improvements, some new features, they let you do that. I'm not going to call it open source because it technically isn't before Strider gets up on my case. It's just one of those things because the community has been contributing a lot. They contributed the entire Vulcan backend. The Linux editor, which is kind of crashy still, that it was also granted by the community. And I don't see Unreal kind of pushing Linux anywhere near as close as, say, Unity did. Because as much as we rail on Unity, and we rail on it a lot because they've now introduced SDL2, but their input scheme was horrible. If everything was very bare bones, but it had a basic configuration that worked across Linux, Mac, Windows, Android, everywhere you wanted to put it, you could run it. But it was very, very unoptimized. And Vulcan, I think it's going to actually make it worse, at least on the first few instances, because, like Josh said, it's the developer actually has to put a lot more work because Nvidia and AMD and even Intel, they can't really ship the old hacks that they used to with their drivers. Intel never really did that on Linux because they had the open source driver. But I'm sure they do it on Windows, and I know for a fact that NVIDIA used to do that on Linux as well with OpenGL. They had specific hacks in their driver to get certain games to work better and get better performance with certain things. Now they've given up on that as well. They still offer their drivers are fully proprietary, but they have a vendor-neutral driver, which means they're using the exact same OpenGL implementation as everyone else. And that's awesome. So let's hope that would people, all of this just to say that when people finally start working on Vulcan, we need that vendor neutral thing to actually become a thing if Linux is to get more games and good performing games at that.
That sounds great, but we need to wrap this up because we've taken up too much time from the originator of JoshTech.com. But I do want to ask you two questions. The first one being, system upgrade wise, everyone's like AMD hype train, woo woo, and get on that business. But is this something to look forward to? Do we save our Christmas monies and an expectation for Ryzen?
I think so. For myself, I mean, and I can only take my own distinct viewpoint here because I'm me. Mm-hmm. But I've been running an 8350 for the last 5 years.
Right on.
I'm running an Asus Sabertooth 990FX. Their first revision of that. What?
It's to say what I have.
Oh, nice. Yeah, and it's dying. I run a really heavy duty game and things start breaking. So I was thinking, I'm just going to get a 6770K. Going to put in a decent Z170 board in, and I'm going to be happy for the next couple of years because I really didn't know what Zen was going to be like. And better yet, I didn't know what the chipset situation was going to be like and what they were going to be able to do for expansion. I mean, they're going to be having NVMe support as a native M.2. And then I heard, they've got, they essentially contracted Asmedia out to handle the Southbridge. Now, Asmedia has, some pretty decent controllers out, but they've never compared well to what Intel and even AMD did with like SATA support and the latest NVMe M.2 stuff. And so it does give me a little pause there, upgrading to an AM4 product because I/O is still really damn important. And if you've ever struggled with the old SB600 from AMD and its SATA support and all the crap and garbage, or even before that, I can't remember what the that old Southbridge. It was some 500 series, and it was only seen in like 3 motherboards. But they were pretty much garbage. And I really hope that As Media has done a better job, because it's certainly going to be important.
Yeah, and especially if AMD wants to compete with Intel at the chipset level, because NVMe on Intel chipsets has been working really well.
Strider, do you have any
really damn
closing
fast.
arguments? You AMD
Not
hating
really.
Frenchman.
Not really. I'm just waiting for them to release the actual thing and see how it performs. I'm not planning to get one because I'm okay for the next couple of years with what I have. So, but if it has good performance, and more importantly, if we see a Ryzen on Vulcan, I'm pretty sure those CPUs will be some good stuff. Well, with Vulcan.
Yes, because definitely at the end of the day, that's one of the things I'm personally thinking about is even the 4-core, 8-threaded part will, can't promise this, but I'm assuming it will effectively curb stomp my 8150. And I'm looking forward to that. Josh, where can the people scream in your direction for the 9 people who watch our little show?
Oh, geez. You could follow me at Twitter on it's at Josh D. Walrath.
Mm-hmm.
You can come and see my stuff at pcpro.com. But before we close out, and it's really interesting that you mentioned your 8150. I had a discussion with a coder developer today, and he talked about how in certain workloads, the K10, which is the old Phenom 2, was significantly faster than the new FX. Now, in certain other workloads, the FX was faster, but we started talking about that. And essentially, he did an experiment that kind of brought about our way of thinking that kind of proved that we were correct in that the way AMD handled the core multi-threading was just not a great idea.
Yeah.
Because you've got 2 threads going in there. And so this guy had some SSE instructions that did like a mem copy. And so he sent those out and he's like, okay, I've got 8 threads. We're doing mem copy, and it's running at 60% the speed of a K10 based unit. And if you think about it, Bulldozer and Piledriver, they have 4 floating point units to 8 integer units. And so he changed his code around to do a 64-bit int, and performance went, more than double of what he was getting with SSE. And so we see that with going to a more hyper-threading type solution is probably a much better option for AMD, especially when you're talking IPC, because in a single-threaded thing, you're going to be able to whip things through there quickly instead of you're going to the front end of a Bulldozer and it needs to decide, well, is it going to go to integer A or integer B, or do we just pass things off to the float and go from there? Excuse me, I've got a really itchy nose for some reason. It's the construction dust. But I think simplifying it and doing and applying a hyper-threading, they can learn some good things from what they did with CMT and apply it to this new set. And I think that it's going to be a lot better implementation for coders than what we had to experience. Because remember, we did see, even with Microsoft Windows stuff, a pretty good percentage increase in overall performance when they adjusted the OS to look at Bulldozer and Piledriver in the latest series and how to actually direct threads. So if you've got a workload that's only 2 threads, you're not going to just send it to one core where they use the 2 different int units and the shared floating point. It's going to do two different modules. And that was not an easy thing to implement at first, and it got better with AMD pushing it in Microsoft. And I imagine the same thing happened in the Linux side as well. But this kind of makes things a little bit more simpler.
Because we have games that work with, our 8-core. With the 8150, I'll give you a perfect example of recently Deus Ex, Mankind Divided.
Mm-hmm.
Rubbish, even with a 980. But then you look at a game like Metro Last Light or 2033, the remastered, or the original editions, they take advantage of all 8 threads, and even at 4K, at 38, well, not real 4K, but, 3840 by 2160, what this monitor does, it still maintains over 60.
Yeah, as long as your instructions are int, you're going to be doing well, just because they've got units that handle each thread. If you start doing SSE and float stuff, that's when things get a little tricky.
And that's why AMD sharing an L2 cache module in between 2 cores is a bad idea.
Okay,
I think the developer could certainly tell us more about that than I could.
That's going to do it for this thing, and we're about to go to that thing because I totes forgot how we cut this in.
Indeed. Speaking of feedback, if you'd like to get in touch with us, linuxgamecast.com, you hit the contact button, you fill out the form. It's pretty easy. Make sure you pick LWDW for this particular show. And if you'd like to send some hate mail over to Linux Gamecast Weekly, you can also do that. Just make sure to pick the appropriate show and a little Dropboxy thing. Cool. All right. And you can also leave us a Patreon comment if, you want to. But last week, we mentioned Jack for some reason. Jack D. Yeah.
Atomic came back in. He says, regarding running Jack, it's not nearly as hard as you make it out to be. It took me the better part of an hour to do it right. Jack doesn't require a real-time kernel. It's nice to have that. Reduces latency. That's code word for makes it work. But I haven't found latency to be a problem. Getting Jack to work with Bolt's audio and the chain I've built is trivial. Simply give Jack a duplex interface that is turned off in Pulse, and load Jack's sync source modules as needed in Pulse to link the 2 servers.
Very intuitive. I guess he did use trivial, not intuitive, so you got to pass on this one, Atomic.
No, Atomic's just walking in. He's like, I'm smarter than all of you. So.
Yeah. And you know what you could do, Atomic? You could release a video tutorial on how to make this, because you make it sound like it's simple, but pretty sure it's not.
Are you kidding me? Look at that. I mean, that's the easiest.
And he does have a point. You don't actually need the real-time kernel, but yeah, it helps considerably, because Jack it's meant for people who actually care about latency when it comes to their audio, because they're usually like producers or composers or what have yous. And they kind of need that snappiness, real-timeness, whatever you want to call it. So, yeah.
Hey, man, I still think, if I was going to rebuild a box from scratch, I would do it with like Jack from the ground up. This is always something I've always wanted to play around with. And trust me, I'm not a fan of Bolt's audio, if you didn't know that. We used to use, we were using ALSA to record this for a long time. Then Pavu Control came out and made it borderline usable. So we've just kind of been sticking with that. But good on you, mate, for letting us know how the big boys do it. So,
Predator 8-bit, he says, snaps versus flat packs versus app images. You always compare snap packages and flat packs to app images, but never mention the big difference between them. Snaps and flat packs are sandbox unlike app images, which is the whole point of having snaps and flat packs over app images. Although, since sandboxing doesn't work under X at all, there is no point in using them. Thank you. Thank you. That's all I wanted everyone else to see. There is no point to flat packs, app images. Well, app images, sort of there are. Snap packages and flat packs, right now, kind of pointless.
Well, they got to do some groundwork on them, man. Why are you going to be hating on them like that?
Because they're pointless.
No, not really, because with Flatpaks, you have these runtimes. You can ship with the more recent version of the GNOME runtime, the GTK runtime. And this is something you can't, you usually don't have with app images. So this is good stuff.
Yes, because app images are actually completely self-contained, as you'd expect, yes.
Mm-hmm. It could become useful in the future.
Yes, it could, but right now, it isn't.
Not right now, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody is out there saying it's ready for the big show, it's ready for prime time.
Canonical wants you to.
Canonical's going to canonical, man. Come on, there's nothing we can do about that. But that's going to wrap it up For this week's Linux Weekly Daily Wednesdays, if you want to get in touch with me, I'm at Vinstone on the Twitter nets, plus Vinstone on the G+s.
I am Pedro Mateos. You can find me at Unaccounted For on Twitter, or just being a very obnoxious person over on Google Plus at plus Pedro Mateos.
And you can find me on Twitter at Striker, or on Google Plus at plus Mathieu Commandant, or Lutris.net also. You can support the project as well on patreon.com/Lutris.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.